The next presentation is actually a group of 4 speakers. They are the creators of the creative collective 99 and Counting. 99 and Counting is a creative collective featuring the thoughts, opinions, and experiences of Armenians in the diaspora and non-Armenian advocates, providing thousands of readers with the opportunity to understand the relevance and the continued importance of the Armenian Genocide. So, if you could welcome along with me Misag Artinian, Melissa Lake, John Martirosyan, and Taline Martirosyan.
When I first read the description of this panel, the 2 words that kind of stuck out at me was cultural revival and cultural rebirth. And I sat and thought about what I had to say about this topic. And I struggled. I really, really struggled. And I tend to be a quick thinker, and I tend to always know what I want to say and how I want to say it, so it drove me a little crazy that I couldn't come up with anything until I figured out why I was having such a hard time. And the reason was because how can you revive, or how could there be rebirth of something that was never dead? A year ago today, we were complete strangers. Except that John is my brother, so I knew him a little bit. But the rest of us didn't know each other, and we live in different parts of the country. John and I are from LA, Misag is from Virginia, and Melissa's from Boston. And we have a 5th writer who couldn't be here today, but she was studying at Oxford at the time in the UK. So between the 5 of us, some of us speak Armenian, some of us don't, some of us are half Armenian, some of us are full Armenian. Some of us have come from communities and been raised in communities where there are overwhelming a number of Armenians, and some of us come from places where there are absolutely no Armenians. Some of us have been to Armenia, some of us have lived in Armenia, some of us have never been to Armenia ever. So this group is all across the board. We come from very different backgrounds. We have 5 very different personalities. And when I say very different, I mean, I really mean it. We had a 6-hour road trip coming out here, and that just confirmed everything that we have right here. But at the end of the day, there's one thing that connected us together. And that one thing is the fact that we all belong to a generation of people who were never meant to exist. And what I mean by that is that 100 years ago, when the Armenian Genocide was being perpetrated, the intent was to annihilate an entire race, which means that they were trying to ensure the fact that there would be no descendants. Essentially, there would be no us. But our ancestors survived, and that is what we have in common. And so, can you imagine just for a second how strong of an impact a single event must have had in order for it to bring together a group of strangers 100 years later? And so it's been a year now. Last April, I put this group of writers together and we created a collective, and it's called 99 and Counting. And this is a website where we feature the thoughts and the opinions and the experiences of Armenians. And so we started writing. We wrote about identity and culture and what it's like to be raised an Armenian here in the US, and what it's like to belong to a diaspora and to be born outside of Armenia but still have this connection to somewhere we've never been growing up. How is this unfamiliar and unknown place such a big part of our lives? And so we wrote. And in addition to the things that we wrote, we received guest submissions from all over the world. From Oregon, from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, from Brazil, from Lebanon, from all over the place. I mean, even like cities we've never even heard of. But point being, Armenians have a lot to say. And these are not just the stories of our ancestors and of what happened 100 years ago. These are our stories. These are the stories of the new generation, the people who are still living the effects of the genocide. And so we published these stories and people read these stories, and we have seen the impact of these stories on readers, and Misag is going to tell you guys a little bit more about the content of our blog and the impact that it's had.
Hi everyone. As Taline mentioned, I am from Virginia, and I actually remember when she first called me because it so happened that I had just moved to Los Angeles, actually this month last year. And when she called me and she was like, hey, I'm starting this project, and I was thinking that, you know, I've read your work and I was saying maybe you would want to partake, and I was like, oh baby, that sounds kind of cool, like what's it about? And she's like, the Armenian Genocide. And instantly I panicked, right? I was like, what am I supposed to say? I don't consider myself an authority on the subject matter of genocide, and I didn't feel as though I had anything to say anything that hasn't been said already. And so I gave Taline a list of names of people who were more articulate and smarter and more charming than me, and she was like, no, Isak, I want you. And I was like, you know, I was very validated by that. You know, not since I got complimented on my eyebrows at a Starbucks have I ever felt that kind of validation. And so I was like, okay, fine. You know, you want me, and I'll write something. And I wanted to write about, I guess, my experience as living in Glendale, California, which I'm sure some of you might know is like the second biggest population of Armenians outside of Armenia. And I was like, okay, well, this might be an opportunity for me to kind of explore that identity struggle. And so, as a result, I wrote what is titled, it's an essay, a humorous piece called A Douchebag from Glendale. And in the essay, I document a little bit of my experience of talking to non-Armenians in Glendale about what their perceptions are about Armenians, and sometimes in a stealthy way in which I introduce myself as Mike. And so they don't know I'm Armenian because apparently I'm ambiguous ethnically, which works out like at TSA screenings apparently. But anyway, in Douchebag from Glendale, I also talk a lot about like my identity struggle of living in Virginia, where I was surrounded by no Armenians whatsoever. And in that, whenever I would bring up the idea of like me being Armenian, I was met with like, oh, you know, you're mysterious and that's intriguing. Like, tell me more about what it's like to be Armenian. And that was also really positive for me because then I had an opportunity to set up a positive kind of idea of what an Armenian is. And so it was like, you know, a huge burden on my shoulders, and I always tried my best to, you know, for better or for worse, start a good reputation for Armenians. But when I came to Glendale, on the other hand, things changed because I was automatically associated with car insurance fraud and all this other things like that I had no responsibility over. And so that's what the article more or less is about. And you know, I would suggest for everyone to maybe check out our blog. There's amazing pieces on there. And in fact, what was it called? Freshly Pressed, which is like a showcase of WordPress editors, decided to showcase, I'm saying that word too much, but they decided to display my article on their website. And after that, a whole bunch of people started coming to our website and commenting on all of our issues that we were bringing up. And that was really great. And I'd like to share a few of the comments that we received. This one in particular was on the Douchebag from Glendale story. I'll read it. This is by a person named David Gonzalez. And he said, I shamefully am one of those people who view most Armenians that way. Reading what you wrote made me realize how wrong I've been. As a Hispanic male, I'm sorry for the people who view Armenians in such an awful way, and I'm sorry for being one of them shamefully. I came in reading this article and the comments of the article thinking I'd only see what I've always thought of Armenians, and I was completely blown away by how wrong I've been. So that was a very powerful comment because it goes to show you that there's a lot of people who really don't understand the Armenian experience, and sometimes injecting some humor, I think, really puts like a human face on our struggles. And that's something that I was very conscious of, like going in with my blog pieces. Another thing that I wanted to read, this is another comment on that article. So this person wrote, from an American point of view, most of us are ignorant. I like that many of the comments here encourage you to teach others about your culture and open the eyes of those who cannot understand because they do not share similar struggles. They need you more than they know. And that was the second validating thing of my entire life. After the eyebrow comment, and then Tali's is like somewhere like third. The next comment that we would like to talk about is another article that we received from a person named Medina, and she is an Afghan-American Muslim woman. And in her article, which is titled An Open Letter to Armenians, she kind of expressed her feelings about what it's like to live in the world in which people like the Turks who committed such an awful crime and who identify as Muslim are, in like the discrepancy between her religion and then like that. So let me just read that because she says it better than I could. I remember first hearing the word genocide and the grief on your faces when you remember. How shocked I was that this was not in our school books, not one page. I remember hearing that it was the Muslims who did it and how guilty I felt, knowing the same melodic call to prayer that brings me peace must bring you pain memories of your ancestral past. I know. That's why we're featuring that here. And so this was really powerful to all of us because it really underscored the fact that people who come from all walks of life can kind of find some common ground in all of our struggles. And so what we wanted to set out to do with our blog was to give a voice to the voiceless. And these are people who are expressing their real identities and their struggles. And then they're also learning something new out of it, like David Gonzalez or her, who had never really thought about the Armenian situation, or if she had, she wanted to express her own thoughts. So these were really poignant moments in this whole journey. And so I'd like to transition now to Tallene here, who unfortunately couldn't be with us because she's in Spain. But she did create a video in which she talks about like some of the poetry that she had contributed to our blog. So go ahead.
Inhabit this sort of interstitial space where Armenia is home and not home, and the United States is home and not home. And so this poem is about that experience, and it's also about being a female poet and a female voice amongst a long tradition of very loud Armenian male literary voices. And it's called Homemaker. You may think I write to move you, but I write to move myself from one place to another. The words that are missing from this poem are somewhere else. The salt that is missing from the borscht is somewhere else. The mountains that are missing from Armenia are somewhere else. I'm a creator of nothing spectacular with the power of invisibility. I'm a homemaker at my writing desk. I'd like to emphasize that I began writing poems because I was so frustrated at this Armenian literary tradition of writing about genocide and of writing about Western Armenia and of writing about lands lost and people displaced. And I wanted to write about other aspects of the Armenian diaspora experience. I felt like there was this one aspect, a really traumatic aspect, that was sort of sucking all of the creative energy and I felt like there were other aspects that really deserved attention, but the irony here is that in considering myself an Armenian writer, I inevitably write about genocide. And I think it's this trauma that's intergenerational that has prompted me to do so. So I always try to make the explanation shorter.
Sorry, we cut her off right next time. A big thing that we're focusing on today is Armenian culture and what it is today. So I'm a science major, so this is probably going to be kind of ridiculous, but this is called the cladogram, and it'll make sense. I'll kind of talk about it. An important part of saying Armenian culture has never died is to focus on its evolution. In biology, we determine the fitness of a species by its ability to adapt to and cope with its environment. And just like animals will experience the Darwinian survival of the fittest law of nature, cultures throughout society have come and gone, waxed and waned, morphing and changing with time, some continuing on while others are left to die. As a scientist, I'm inclined to draw parallels to the laws of nature, so Armenian culture was no different to me. I see our common ancestor, which is Armenia, a rich and concentrated culture exclusive to almost one singular area of the world, and I see its descendants, its gradual evolution and growth, its continued adaptations needed to survive in new environments. I see the branching from the original, the creation of different subfamilies within a greater species, and like its species in nature, while all share a similar common ancestor, while our basic foundations are from the same source, all different Armenian cultures had to individually adapt to and survive within unique environments. From my personal cultural experience, I was raised believing I was Turkish, while still knowing I was Armenian. Whether it be to spare a child from tales of horrific violence, the inability to speak of a wound still raw and painful, or the fact that the reason my family is here today is thanks to the kindness of Turkish strangers. My mother never really spoke to me of the genocide when I was young. So my youth was a mix of two conflicting cultures. I ate breakfast in a kitchen adorned with Armenian flags, but then talked about Turkey when people asked what my ethnicity my mother was. My mother never renounced her nationality, but also never abandoned her heritage. She was Turkish Armenian, just as American diaspora-born Armenians are Armenian American. But I think this cultural fusion speaks more for Armenian perseverance than it does of forced Turkish cultural assimilation. My mother and her family spent years hiding their true ethnicity, adopting a culture that had seen to the decimation of her own. And yet their root culture was not lost, it had simply changed, evolving in its latency. I find myself now, an adult, raised a part of two enemy cultures, proud to say I'm both, but also acutely aware that I'm Armenian by blood and by birthright, and a Turk only by genocide. And thus, I don't think it would be too bold to say that Armenian genetics are a dominant trait. Somewhere on one of our 46 chromosomes sits an allele unique to Armenians, and even through generational dilution, it still permeates as strong as ever. Even I stand up here today, half Turkish diaspora-born Armenian, and half generationally American, that's my last name, raised in a town where I was the only Armenian, incapable of speaking the language of my ancestors, but more than aware that I am Armenian before I'm anything else. And whether it be through generations of ethnic mixing or from sheer distance to an elusive homeland, this genomic marker still remains permanent and impervious to the effects of time and other evasive cultural interference. Armenians are a culture of people marred by tragedy and driven by strength. We are a culture of people who refuse to be forgotten, a people who refuse to be ignored and driven to obscurity. We are a culture that has not only survived through insurmountable strife and impossible odds, we are a culture that has come back from the systemic annihilation of our people stronger than we were before. You can drag us from our homes, you can burn us and rape us and reduce us to nothing, you can forcefully and coercively take the people out of Armenia, but you cannot, through any form of abuse or injustice or forced assimilation, take Armenia out of the people.
Melissa is an incredible writer, obviously. They really all are, though, and I really urge you guys all to visit our blog after this conference, take a look at some of our content, leave us some feedback, keep in touch with us, let us know how we've been doing, and maybe even contribute. Now, we're not quite done yet, I'm sorry. I'm going to say a few things to finish up. Yesterday I looked at some of our stats to see how the blog's been doing lately, and I did so firstly hoping to impress you guys, first and foremost, but also for a second, more important reason that I'm going to get to. We started this blog, and in the first week of the blog being live, we had viewers in more countries than we had all collectively ever been to. And to date, we have a following in over 130 different countries around the world, and a viewership of over 60,000. So I believe we have done something significant here, and what I believe we've done is effectively create a link between a diaspora that's otherwise so heavily dispersed, and at the same time open up that link to different peoples and different cultures. Now, I grew up going to protests, and I grew up going to the rallies and the educational hearings, but this has always been very different for me. This has been more open, more interactive, more responsive. I've met people, Armenians and non-Armenians, that I otherwise never would have. I've made contacts in cities that I've never been to. We have people sending us their thoughts, their ideas, their perspectives, giving us feedback, comments, commenting amongst themselves and discussing. We have people offering us suggestions on ways to expand our blog. We have people offering us help to expand our blog. People we've never met offering us whatever specific ability they have, anything they can do to make our blog bigger and better. And that's absolutely phenomenal that we're even getting that kind of support. And again, I know we've touched on people contributing and how important that's been to us. But I'm going to say one last thing. As the editor receiving these submissions, there's a really strange feeling that I get every time I do see one of these submissions. And it's hard to describe, but I'm going to try. It feels almost as if that piece of work that I get sent to me, it was almost as if it was written at some point in time before our blog was even created. But whoever did make that piece of work really didn't know what to do with it, almost as if they had nothing to do with it. So they put it on a shelf somewhere where it did nothing but collect dust. And until one day, that creator of the content found our platform and for whatever reason felt compelled to revisit that piece of work and felt some desire to share it on our site. And in doing so, managed to effectively give that piece of work purpose and bring it to life. And the fact that we can offer people the opportunity to do that is absolutely incredible to me. And the fact that we can offer our viewers access to this otherwise hidden information is absolutely incredible. Now, I gave you those stats because, like we said, we are 5 very different people with different abilities and different interests, different schedules and priorities, from different time zones too. And it was very hard to work on this blog, and we did so in our spare time. This has been a side project. We all have our own obligations. I work 60 hours a week. Melissa is going for her master's in pre-med. Misag just moved from Virginia and is starting a whole new life in LA. Colleen went through her last year of law school, and the other Colleen that you guys saw, she was writing her dissertation for her master's and just moved to Spain for a new job opportunity. So we come home late at night, half asleep, and somehow still managed to put a few hours into this project, and we've managed to make it this successful. And if we are able to do that, the 5 of us, under these completely unideal conditions, it really makes me wonder what our generation is capable of. If our generation were to collectively focus our abilities, our creativity, and our drive in any direction, really, it's almost unimaginable what we can accomplish. And the amount of activity and involvement we've seen from this blog is a testament to how active and receptive our generation is and how willing they are to move forward and make progress. Our culture isn't dead, it's very much alive, and it is going places.
Thank you for all of these wonderful presentations. I am inspired and energized listening to them. If I can get all of the presenters to come up here, I will try to step off to the back a bit. We've got a large group, so. We have a few minutes for Q&A. Thankfully, the other sessions were a little on the late side too, which is great for us. And I will just try to stay in the back so I can see hands that are up. And we have one right here. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Dr. Bani, my question is to you. It is sad what happened to the Indian communities. I am shocked and surprised why we don't hear of your plight more often, where we, full disclosure, I'm Armenian, we have this loud noise that we make about the Armenian Genocide. Can you comment on that, please?
Well, thank you for being here, and I was so glad to be asked to be here, and I think part of the reason was to share my story. I think because we're small and not recognized, that's why people don't really hear about us, and when there are disasters, you know, there are larger communities that are impacted than us, and I think that's another reason. And because a lot of our tribal members only started going to school in the early 1970s because of segregation, so a lot of our people only speak French. So they haven't been very active politically and you know, involved in movements. Most people are fishermen and they live in the community. So I think that's probably the main reason, because of our isolation.
I think that many of the writers touch on the fact that grief is something that we as Armenians incorporate into our writing. And that this is something that stems obviously from just being Armenian and the genocide. Do you think there will ever be a point where as a people we would stop writing about this grief? Or is it just very ingrained in us? Or I would just be interested in hearing everyone's opinion on that. And I already had 99 something, so
I think there's like a difference in what I call maybe genocide narratives and what I have hopes for, like the future of Armenian American literature. I think Talene spoke to that issue a little bit. But I think kind of like the slavery issue for the African American population, you can have contemporary literature that falls under the umbrella of slavery literature, because everything that Black Americans write today is a result of slavery. And in a similar way, we can have, as like modern Armenian writers, we can grapple with other issues. We can grapple with, you know, car insurance fraud and our reputation, and virginity issues, masculinity issues, our predisposition towards homophobia. We can tackle all of those things and still kind of fall under the umbrella of genocide literature or Greek literature, because the reasons we are writing in English or in French or in Turkish is because of the genocide. So inherently, everything is kind of post-genocide narrative, post-genocide literature. And we don't need to have like an explicit category or genre of non-genocide narrative or non-genocide style. I think it's intrinsically part of our language, the way we use our language, and the content of our work.
Psychologically speaking, we will, whenever we experience such a trauma of genocide or human-made disasters, we kind of, our time concept stops, and everything is after the genocide. Everything is the moment that earthquake happened, after the earthquake, after the war, after the tsunami. And whatever happened before, it kind of stays in the shadows, which was mentioned in your poem or expression, that we get stuck in that trauma. And in order for us to be able to write, express, feel, reflect on the whole, before, after, during, after, is to go through the healing process. And writing is one of the ways to heal. But again, we need to start moving towards celebration, survival, meaning-making, lessons learned, how to prevent, how to learn about other genocides, not be so narrow focused, which is from trauma again. When we experience trauma, we only are feeling our pain, our grief, our trauma, and we don't know. It's happening in Congo. You know the 5 million people who were killed there because of the genocide? You know that it's going on in 48 countries as we speak at this moment? Do we know that? And do we do anything about it? Do we learn about all these? No, we don't. Because we are in this tunnel vision. Our pain is greater, more palpable, more justifiable than others. And there's that, therefore, this hierarchy of post-genocide or Holocaust. Hierarchy of suffering. Who's the first? Always Holocaust wants to be the first. And then, after that, they line up. One says, oh, I am the first. Armenians are the first genocide. Cambodians have a different way to identify and distinguish themselves from the suffering. And every one of us, nations, have a different way of distinguishing ourselves. But I think with healing and coming together, sharing the meanings and the healings, we can prevent future genocide because we're not able to prevent. We keep doing the same thing. Thank you.
We have time for one more question. So I know that 99 Counting hasn't spoken to. Do we have any questions in particular for them?
I can ask them a question. I think it's fantastic, the passion that I see in your speeches, and I want copies of them, if you have them. How do you ignite that passion in a lot of other Armenian youth like you that are within the United States that I don't necessarily see in all? How did you guys get the passion, and how do we pass that passion along to them to continue, repeating or communicating, educating about the Armenians and our history?
I think that creating this blog, what I've learned is that a lot of younger Armenians have it in them. I think it's a matter of really reaching out. Because people have things to say. We've received submissions, and there are submissions that, these submissions weren't written after somebody found our blog and thought they wanted to express these ideas. There are people that submitted things that were written, like John said, a year ago, 2 years ago. And that means if you're writing about something, that means you feel something. There's something there. So when you're sharing that, I feel like a lot of the people that contributed, from speaking to them, I think that that spark came out when they posted something and they received feedback from other Armenians. Because before this blog, a lot of the submissions, like John said, it's just on a shelf somewhere and it's sitting there. But if somebody's already writing about it, or if you're reaching out to people and telling them, hey, we have this project, you live in the diaspora, do you have something to say? And a lot of times they do. But it's just a matter of, I think, younger generation reaching out to each other. Because it's there.
How are you getting your blog out? How are you getting it out to the youth?
Mostly Facebook and social media and word of mouth.
Word of mouth, a lot of word of
A
mouth.
lot of word of mouth.
We're too old to figure that out. They know what they
We need to conclude at this time, but I want to both thank the presenters, but also invite you all to speak to them individually or in small groups afterwards, because I think there is a few minutes for a break before the next session.